Cheserae and Birgitta, a while back, I took your training for the death doulaship midwifery, and I think we can all agree, and I testify to the fact that every single human should take this course. That it's really important for everyone to understand what the process of dying can look like and how we can be supported through it and how we can make death a more easeful part of our day today. And so I guess I'd like to start from there. What is the taboo of death that you come across, and why do you feel it's uncomfortable for people to talk about?
I think it's more than anything that we are estranged from death. It's just unless you say here in Western cultures, is that we've done a very good job removing ourselves from it and pushing it to the side. That it's no longer living in the community or in families, but we have people we don't even know tending to us. And so we are not connected on maybe a heart or soul level to this really experience that we all are going to move through. And I think that's where the seed of it is, this disconnect that we've created.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking, it's the disconnect, right? We're not holding it in our day-to-day living anymore. It's interesting because we're so educated what birth is, right? But we're not educated around death at all. So it's created this beautiful, not so beautiful gap called fear. And so we're unable to kind of lean into fear as a culture. And so we're keeping ourselves quite separate from it. And we're not holding it in our, like I said, in our day to day. So if we're holding living, we've got die. It's not separate, it's one.
Right, exactly. And we can also perhaps talk about that later on as well, about how birth and dying are so close together and how there was a separation with the business of birth coming in. There's a separation with the business of death coming in. But I was really deeply touched by your work because I think there's also this deeper layer where you're really bringing back this very ancient feminine practice in a way that was really held by our ancestors. And I suppose in Europe, at least, I had such a different experience of when my grandmother died. There was no question that she would spend 7 days in a room in the house, and that we would be sleeping right next to her, and the family would all come around and spend time with her before she was ready to take her off to her burial.
Yeah.
So there is something that reminds me of these ancient ways.
Yeah. And they're not necessarily so ancient. For most of us, it's 1 or 2 generations back, which isn't that long. So, but there is this knowing that we have, that there is a different way. And I think what we're seeing that more and more people are wanting to reclaim the dying process as something that belongs close to us, belongs with us, with our family, with our friends, in our community. And I think there's so many beautiful expressions of what they might look like based on our cultural heritage, our religious beliefs, our spiritual practices, so many different expressions of that. But they have in common that they are centered around love. And they have in common that the dying and death itself belongs to us, that we are not separated from it. And I think that's really an important piece for us to remember, that it might look very different, and what happened in Italy would be very different from what maybe I had experienced in the Northern European countries, or what someone might experience in a city or on the countryside or here in the US or somewhere else, but that there is a seed that we all recognize. There's a truth that we all recognize. And so it's not so much about there's one way, and we don't teach there's one way, but we are teaching for us to be quiet enough and willing enough to sit in the unknown and in the wonder of it, so that we can uncover and reimagine what it might look like.
That's so beautiful. And in fact, one of your mottos is, in the end, there is only love.
Yes.
And we can see in all the sacred traditions that they're woven with love. And so always returning to that space of love. And that's the place we have to serve from our hearts. It has nothing to do with our minds when we're in this work. It's all in that space of love, that heart center. And truly, it's to remember. To remember. We have forgotten.
Yeah.
And as you said, that it was 2 generations back that we care for our own, or maybe a few more generations back, but really remembering that it is, there is this reawakening that we all know inside our hearts how to tend and how to return back to that space of love.
Yeah. Yeah. And so when someone comes to you, for those people who don't know what a midwife does, what are the sort of reasons they would come to you? And then what is the scope of the service that you provide? Which is vast. Yes.
It is. Yes.
Very.
Because there are so many, dying happens in so many different ways, right? And what people need can be so different. Are they going on this journey alone? Are they really well supported by friends and family? Do they have means to have caregivers, or is that already a struggle? Like, there's so many differences. Is it, at the end of a long, long life, or is it with the first breath of life, or even before that breath? Right? We have this idea of death and dying happening somewhere far in the distance, right? But by placing it so far in the distance, we're forgetting that, it happens in so many ways. Peacefully, violently, but that there's something for us about the ability to bring, when people come to us, to bring them back to a recognition that dying itself is an act that is sacred. Dying itself brings from within us feelings of wonder and awe and devotion that we can then lean into, right? So they might be wanting somebody that is going to help them navigate the hospice system, right? Or figure out how to do an advanced healthcare directive, or how to bring the family all on one, in alignment on one treatment. But when you start to speak, and when we start to kind of uncover what's underneath it, is that it has nothing to do with what we do, actually. It has something to do with how we're being. So I think that's the common thread, whether we have a year, one day, whether we meet a family after death, but it's always about the being.
Because it's so rare to have that container. And that's important, right, to walk through that process.
Absolutely, and it's about how you hold that container. And as you said, it's in the essence of that. We're with the family. So we're not just, like you said, we're not just holding maybe a person in their dying days. There's so much more that's happening within that container, whether we're there a day or a year and a half. with the family, the journey can. It's always each and every time. How are we holding this container with love, with grace, with no agenda? There's no agenda when it comes to dying.
And I will say you've been doing it practically vocationally in some ways, just as an active service, and that's changing as it should be, and you're training more people to do what we do.
Yeah.
And I just wanna
Yeah.
honor you for all the years in which
Yeah.
you did this with that love
Yeah.
and service.
And I think what's interesting about that it is like a river. It's always in flow, and every time around, it's different. And so we come in always with fresh eyes, from a place of not knowing, humbly to listen, to see, where we might be able to support. But ultimately, we kind of laugh and say, like, when we do our job, we're kind of out of a job. Because it's beautiful when whether we're teaching a family or a friend, or whether we're teaching others to do this work, we know our job has been well done. When we're standing in the back of the room and things are unfolding and we're not needed, nobody's clinging to us, they are feeling empowered, they are feeling capable of holding everything that is. And so those are the best moments, when you're just like kind of like, oh, it's just unfolding, and they kind of look at you, and all you have to do is just kind of nod and let them know, like, it's okay, this is all good.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. We know when we can step back, just seeing them, we just may hand them the washcloth, and they choose to bathe their loved one for the last time.
And so you might also be teaching the family how to do the shrouding.
Yeah.
That's part of it, using the oils, if that works. And of course, you're just gauging what resonates with the family.
Yeah. It's always seen resonates with the family. And just giving them the invitation, right? We're there to empower them to care for their wonderful. They're in the hospital, wherever they may be. But it's truly really to empower them and walk them through. It might be us the first time, saying, let's try this special oil here. Touch the feet, to touch the body again. Because there's a little nervousness of moving back in and touching our body. So walking the family through very, very gently. And there's always one in the room that loves to take on jobs. Yeah. And then also finding who's not being there, in this space at this time, and giving them the invitation to come in, maybe a child that needs to be with their mother for the last time. Always having that invitation. Children are magical in space. We love it when there's children in space.
Because they get it.
They get it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about the physicality of death versus the spiritual aspect of death and dying, because one thing that really stayed with me, many things stayed with me, but one particularly that I love for me was this idea of needing completion before you let go, to transition. Could you say something about that?
I want to bring some context a little bit
Yes,
first,
please.
actually, just because I think what is part of, we started off having this conversation around fear of speaking about death and dying, and how uncomfortable it is for many people. And that part of that is that when people think about death or dying, we actually often think about it only about the physical. And actually we think about it as a medical event. And that's actually what we're being taught, right?
Yeah.
This is what we're seeing around us, right? It's something you need doctors for and specialists for. You need to be told that you're dying. You need to be told how it's going to be. And so it's a very out of body experience for a lot of people. So that's important when we start to talk about that dying is so much more, right? That's only a little piece of the dying, but that there are so many threads that connect us to all the people we love, and there's so many emotions. And then there's the spiritual aspect. What are the beliefs? What has given us meaning? How do we relate to what is sacred? And so it's important for us to see that they're so that we're almost putting them in little boxes instead of recognizing that they're all one. Right? And that for now, while we are breathing, this is the whole of all of it, right? And I think that what happens is sometimes it's easy for us to focus on the medical and to put someone else in charge. It might not feel good, and it might bring us to suffering because the other pieces of us are not being held. But there's no responsibility for us there. It's just happening to us, and someone else is deciding. Right? The beauty about coming in conversation and sitting and having the time to start to uncover what it means to be emotionally in relationship with your dying, and to be uncovering like what for you does it mean to see dying as a spiritual journey. It becomes like this, for most people, and maybe that was your experience. It's like it's like poof. And we hope that we come to that really early on. And in some ways, Cheserae was talking about children, why they are so magical in the spaces, because in some ways they get it. They get that this is a threshold, a portal, a way to relate to what's magical about life, right? So,
and they're still so very close to spirit children, right? And they're observant of nature, right? Everything that lives is going to die. Yeah. So, but as we have grown to adults, we kind of separate and think that doesn't exist anymore. So it's really about that daily practice, right? To lean into death each and every day, so that when we do meet it, because we're all going to meet it, we're not separate from this, that we have a map. Yeah, right. Like we need a map, right? Because we're not being educated. There's beautiful teachings, of course, in Tibetan Buddhism. They're very well studied around dying, and they have a map. But in our day-to-day culture, we've kind of lost the map. So we must really start, as we said in the beginning, holding both of them. Observing nature is a beautiful teacher of death, right? Observing ourselves each and every day, because we have to learn to die to our dying before it comes. Yes.
And so then the question about the physical versus right has a larger container in which we can hold it. And I know we were going to talk about childbirth and death and the similarities later, but it's such a beautiful way to have people that are unfamiliar with kind of wondering about all of this, for them to recognize that, just like in childbirth is not just about what our physical body does, but if we identify just with the physical, we will experience a lot of pain. We don't know how to move through. And it's similar at end of life. When people don't have the other pieces of the map, and all they know is this is a medical event that's happening to my body, of which I everybody else is deciding, right? And they are a passive, almost passenger.
Mhm.
There's going to be pain.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
And yes, fear is the amplifier of all of that.
Mm.
And when people come to a different place, there might still be pain, you know? I mean, but it's held differently. You have the greater container to hold it. And so pain then is pain, but it's not suffering.
Suffering becomes option. Suffering comes with attachments, identification. So yes, of course, the physical body's closing down. There is pain involved, right? But we have to look at it. And as you said, we add fear into it. It amplifies everything. And we get so identified, we lose track. And we lose the process and what dying is.
Whereas when you are speaking to someone who's dying and perhaps they might see a portal opening, they might see, start to see beings or move to the other side, and you were saying they're taking a train somewhere or going on a journey.
Yeah.
Then you just hold them in that space of recognition.
Because it's not, like again, right? We are accompanying. We are not walking ahead. We are not like pushing or pulling. We are just there to be a witness, to be someone that can help hold the container for all this to unfold. And there's something for all of us that while we might want to have our dying be quiet and we might not want someone to hold our hand. There is something about the container needs to be held.
Yeah.
We always talk about the doors, the physical doors of a home needing a gatekeeper. Someone who can say like, oh, you want to come in? Wonderful. Here's where we're at. And then there's an invitation. They can either come in and hold that space, be part of the fabric that holds it, or maybe it's not the right time to visit.
Right. Yeah.
And as we're moving towards the dying, the physical dying of the body, the container becomes smaller. The amount of people that are around or that are that are needed to support the process become less and less, because the process, once it's on its way, it has its, it's not.
Process is inward once it's on its way.
It's so hard
Yeah.
to build.
Yeah. It's an inward process, and that's when we, know that we moved into a very sacred time.
Yeah.
And the person in their dying days is doing the greatest work of their life in that time. And we have to remind people, we can't fix dying. It's not to be fixed. It's to be with. And the dying is not an emergency. So really retraining the family, reminding them this is a natural process. And not many of us are used to being somebody dying.
Yeah.
Maybe their first time they've ever sat beside someone.
Yes, and you have to be ready to be able to really surrender to that space.
It's a mystery.
Feel that mystery.
Yeah.
And it can be harder in a hospital. I suppose, but that's the experience I have with my father. But there was also a way that just magically the space was there.
Exactly.
In a way, which is brilliant.
Yeah. Right, and it's quieting the external activities.
Yes.
Whether you're in a hospital, a care facility, or even your own home. It's just quieting the external, because now this is a very internal process.
Yeah, I really felt that very strongly.
And part of that is that there, at some point, we are so deep into our process that what to us might look like distractions, the person in their dying is not experiencing that anymore. They are so deep in that, yes, maybe the room is not their home bedroom, but at that point it doesn't matter. They are beyond that. So it's also again like we come. It's almost like there's a continuing letting go of the external and then deepening to the internal, so that the external starts to matter less and less.
Yes.
And for us, that's an important thing to relate to family, right? Because we can get so hung up on the external of everything. And there's a point where the external doesn't matter anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But what is important is not to take the person who are dying time out of their experience.
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
That's a very fragile time.
Yeah, that leads me to my next question. Like, are there any really big do's and don'ts?
Well,
For people who are going through this on their own.
I don't know if the do's and don'ts, that feels like wow, because we have to remember however someone's experiencing, whatever they're experiencing, we have to remember it's their experience. He is perfect. Right? And this is their path and their journey. So it's but as I just said, there are some like fragile moments.
Yeah.
Right? When someone's in their experience, we don't want to take them out of that. Like I said, they're doing some of the most profound, greatest work.
Right.
They're in a very amplified state. They're working. And for us to come in and maybe touch, or you see sometimes the care teams coming in and shaking somebody or moving somebody. And at that point, we don't need that. Right? It's disrupting what's happening.
Got it. Yeah. And there's also moments where I feel the person who's dying knows that they're dying, but no one wants to talk about it.
Right.
No one wants to say it, and check in.
Yeah. And that's a conversation or that's a part of that practice again. How, so that we don't end up needing to do that at the bedside at the end.
Yeah.
Because it's really hard to, it's very hard for a family to embrace a new narrative and a new story when their heart is cracking open and the solidness of ground underneath them feels like it's being pulled away. So that's why it's like sometimes it's not about do or don't. It's about if we can relieve, if we can pull people away from the temptation of stepping in that fear and being with that narrative of like, this shouldn't have happened. Why is this happening to us? Where's God? Like all of these pieces that have them then feel alone and isolated and abandoned, which is the place where fear just wants to becomes a wildfire.
Yeah.
But when we can move them somehow with whatever tools we have or whatever stories they've gifted us that then we can bring back to them so that they can feel that they are part of the fabric of humanity. They are held, they belong, and that this piece that is happening to them now has happened to their ancestors, has happened to all of us in humanity, and it's actually something that needs to happen also. I sometimes talk about it in this funny way of it's the garden compost.
Yes.
Right? It's a funny way to look at it, but life doesn't happen without death. It doesn't. So in some way, that death is a gift. That death is saying thank you for the living that has now been completed, and allows this moving forward of all of us, all humans, all animal beings, all plant beings, all of it to continue. Wow.
If we learn to listen and really truly listen from our hearts, the greatest teaching will come.
Yeah. So the only do is
Just
come from love, be with love, and whatever stands in that way, right? It's if you can sit there and just for all whatever is swirling around, if you can hold that, the energy changes, the energy shifts, and where we see this in so many instances, but sometimes we're pulled to the emergency room and something tragic has happened and someone has already died or is, being operated on, and there's so much anxiety. What can I do? The only thing that makes any sense is to just be a vessel for loving kindness, to just be there and be and help people move your breath so that they calm down. And so they recognize that while all of it screams emergency,
Yeah.
there's something else going on at the same time.
I think we have to remember that dying is not a fail.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, many people see that dying is a failure. Whether they've been, living with the cancer process and using the language that's used often around,
Right.
like they're trying to fight this, they're battling with this. It's very important to be mindful of the language, right? So now when this person has completed their life, what are they left with? The family around feeling like they failed, right? And those aren't healing words. Those are words that now create that bucket of fear again. Right. So we have to look at that. We have to look at our languaging around how we're even using this. And are we using death and dying? Right now, we skip over that often. People will say, there's been a transition that's happened. Well, we're not giving it clearly justice when we say things like that. Yeah, it's done. And I know for both Birgitta and I, we've been in situations where there might be moms dying in the bed, and the daughter's saying, please don't tell mom that she's dying.
Yes.
Please don't tell her this is hospice. And hospice is a marvelous, marvelous organization to have. So it's, what have we done to mom now in her dying days? We've taken away her experience. We haven't seen her in her full expression.
Yeah, we're not allowing her to have her full process.
Yeah. So we really have to watch this.
And that goes back to where we started the conversation about how fearful we are and how we're not able to speak about it, right? But if we see death as failure, if we see death as, the punishment or, then how can we praise it? How can we hold it with love? How can we recognize it as something that is life-giving? We cannot. And that's a big piece of for us to wonder about, all of us, like wondering like what is needed for us to shift so that death is what comes next for all of us. Right?
Our understanding is of the afterlife or what happens next, but
Right.
there is just that process of elimination, alchemy, cycle of alchemy.
Yeah. And when
We
we
see it so much in just nature, right? Flowers bloom beautifully, and then they go to seed, and a new birth comes. That is life.
and
death.
and it's why love is so beautiful and fierce, because we know that flower that we are so in love with will die, right? We know that we love each other and it is not forever. Right?
Yes.
I mean, I don't think anybody loves the plastic rose as much as they do the real one, right? It's like, and so that translates to us too. Sometimes if we're not recognizing that that every breath is a gift, that us looking into each other's eyes is special, and it's might not happen again.
Yeah.
Right? Wow.
These moments will never happen.
That's the moment.
Yeah.
And that's the living with death.
Yeah.
Day
Yeah.
by day.
Exactly. There's a consciousness that actually, people will say like, oh my gosh, you're such angels for the work you do. How do you do it? Right? It must be so depressing. And actually, the most amazing thing about it is that when you meet people doing this work, they know how precious life is, and life does not pass them by. They live. That's an incredible gift.
And it's sort of like people who are abroad, they might not have the luxury of sitting with their spirituality and meditating every day.
Yeah.
But they're living so close to that end of life.
Yeah.
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 Looking at
And have to learn from moments,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? Because we'll never return. We're not going to go back.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we have to just we have what we have in this moment. We don't know what we're going to have in 11 seconds.
Yes. Yeah, and it makes me think that separation is actually we're so afraid of separation, but in a way, separation is such part of life also.
Right.
And so we have to include that somehow. But we suffer so much as we're coming out of the womb. It feels like, oh, that's that first separation. But actually, it's a part of our lives.
It's a part of our lives.
Conditions.
We have to look at what our attachments are.
But
Yes.
Thank you.
And move through life with as much as possible.
With grace.
With grace and devotion. Because devotion does not have attachments. It's pure.
And I want to say something about there are so many ways in which death comes to be. And sometimes it comes from war, like you mentioned, war. Right? Sometimes it comes from violence. Sometimes it comes from not having resources. And I think there's something that's important for us that we're not getting in the narrative. Of course, we're not saying that having a violent death is the same as dying peacefully at home with your loved ones around you, right? But the trauma and everything that is making that so hard is not the moment of death itself. It's not the fact that we're leaving this life and, needing to leave our body and moving to whatever is next. The circumstances are something that, can make us and should make us weep. And it should make us feel distressed. And we don't want to, have that for anyone, any being. But it doesn't take away that dying itself is sacred. And sometimes the sacred looks messy. Sometimes we don't recognize it. But it's important for us to grapple with that, to try to figure out where is that and how can we make it sacred. Is it that we are offering prayer and flowers? Is it that we, light candles and stand in a circle and have a vigil? Is it, all that you do, including signing the petition and demonstrating whatever needs to be, right? Action has its place, but the action is not against death. The action is about all that ugly, human societal stuff that makes it hard for us to see the sacred that is right there.
Yes. And so, in fact, you've been doing a lot in your work with sort of pushing the needle towards bringing that sacredness back. And I know that sometimes that's not easy on a practical level. How, what are you bringing with your training? Is that, are you wanting to change the way things are? Are you looking for a coming together? All the different ways.
We're both like, oh, there's so much.
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that.
Yeah.
How do you feel weird?
Yeah.
Yes, but I want to actually. There was one thing that you said, like about how bringing the sacred might not be easy,
Yeah.
and I actually think that that's maybe a misunderstanding, because bringing the sacred is so easy, always.
It's already there. Right?
It's
The divine essence
Yeah.
is in every being.
yeah.
Every being carries that.
Yeah. So it's actually all we have to do is uplift it. And what's beautiful is that people come, like once the space is open, they come with all kinds of beautiful expressions. And there might be some that we recognize, like, oh, here's spiritual text. We recognize that as sacred. But there are so many ways in which we elevate and make something sacred.
Yes.
And
culturally even, and different traditions.
so we do. We have a lot of talks. We have a lot of we bring a lot of examples, and it's great.
Gracefully and gently go within the home. Right?
Yes.
It's never our agenda.
Yeah.
But still, yes.
I think that's really important to remember, that it's just we are, we can come with suggestions if someone asks for it,
Yes.
but it's by invitation.
In a way, it's a blank canvas.
Definitely just making yourself available. So remembering the seed in every being, like I said, right? If we can just reflect back into that space, it gets found. Right? Sacred is not lost.
Yeah.
It's always there. Yeah.
And sometimes it's just as easy as really bringing everyone back to a pause and a breath.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they are beautiful. Throughout life we have threshold moments, right? That we celebrate with ritual, that we make rich, and we make them sacred. But because of that, we actually have a lot of practice. People just don't recognize the amount of practice that they have. So that when it comes to the end of life, we have so many examples that kind of surprise us even, right? Like and that's why it's so beautiful to be in this space of unknowing, because what is sacred to me and what's sacred to you, or we all have something different. You can bring in one leaf from the garden, and that can be the transformation. You can read a poem and it can transform the whole space. You can also do very tactile things, like saying, like, you know what, let's get rid of the hospital equipment, right? That's not being needed anymore, but it's cluttering the space. And let's bring in some flowers. Or, there's so many ways, but people actually know how to do this.
Yeah, exactly. And we don't necessarily have to build a huge altar and feel that we need permission to create it or have to know how to create it. It's just, we can bring in that leaf from outside and the intention and the sacredness that we bring to it is what counts.
Yeah. And once the heart opens, the flood.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it's truly, it opens. And it cracks, as Birgitta said. And it has to grow. So keep allowing that light to come through.
I think there's something that somehow what you were saying just reminded me, though, that it is sometimes people do need that invitation. They don't know what they carry, right?
Yeah.
So that might be that in a home you place a few photographs and flowers, and you put beautiful paper and pens out, and you say, just, write a love note if you feel called to do so, and maybe those will be placed with the loved one after death, right? Or something that we really have found can be really powerful and brings an awareness really like, oh, we know that death is happening. Because for all of this to happen, we need to acknowledge, right? So if we're still walking in and saying like, you look better today, like we're missing a point here, right?
Yeah.
But one of the, sometimes it needs something physical. And so we have brought in a beautiful box, which we sometimes call the envelope of love. Now, it doesn't start out to be beautiful. This is a cardboard box that is a cremation box. And then we paint it white and we bring in art supplies and we invite everyone to write messages. Sometimes people make beautiful artwork, really paintings on there. And other times people want to glue photographs or other things on there. But what it means is that it somehow we now have a physical representation, a container that can hold it. And so we see it, and I just, I always love sharing the beautiful expression of a friend who was dying that we both served. And this box was in their living room. And he would invite people that visited him to, oh, on your way out, just write something for me on the box. And after they left, be like, and it gave such solace. It was such an expression of love. It was such a gift. And it is really the envelope of love that when death has occurred and when this person leaves home for the last time, he's carried in the love of all the people that have contributed, right?
Yes. What an
So-
incredible way to contribute to give meaning.
Yeah. So sometimes we do
Yeah.
bring in ideas or physical, yeah.
And there's something to be said to know that the body's going to be tended to, right? And it knows it has a place where it's going. It's such ease into the heart. And it may not even be, it might not be a box, it can be a shroud. Worked with many families that choose to start making the person in their dying. Says, I'm going to do my own shroud. And you're like, on the seamstress, and they work together. So there's something about knowing where you're going. Or at least that this physical body, spirit body, has another plan. But the physical body, where else is that going to be placed?
Yes, and that's something, it's a new level of consciously
Exactly.
dying.
Yeah. Right.
And it's new and it's ancient.
Yes.
Yeah. Exactly.
Because in many cultures, the death garments, what people would be buried in, what they would wear before being cremated, was something that was hand stitched and kept in the bottom drawer of a dresser. Maybe sometimes it was the garments that they wore when they got married underneath their wedding dress. And then after the wedding, it was placed in paper, placed on the bottom shelf, and stayed there until they died. How beautiful to live with that awareness, but also to have tended to it so beautifully.
Yes.
And wow, to think of the wedding gown, the wedding evening, and how transformational that is in life, and to recognize my next big transformation might be my dying, and here's the garment for it.
That's incredible. The next big portal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's holding both then. The living and the dying.
Yes. So So tell us a bit about your training and how, if people are needing to reach out, how they can reach out, and perhaps if they live far away, even what are their options?
We first have like a little invitation for people. We love to give people an opportunity to be with us and get a feel for who we are. So every once a month we host a conversation, and it's on Zoom, and everyone's welcome. And the conversations are always different because there's something bubbling within whoever shows up. But Cheserae and I will um, sometimes share from our lived experiences. We'll be together and wonder about what people are bringing. Um, and it's powerful because people feel witnessed and heard. Yeah.
It really gives people a place to really begin that conversation, right? Just as we are today. Let's talk about belly, right? So it really allows for that space of expansion to dive deep into that mystery with us. It's such a beautiful, beautiful call because we never know who's going to show up, and people from all over the world can show up, and it's just really a wonderful place to feel help. It's beautiful.
So anyone can come and
Spend an
help by
hour.
you, spend time with you. And
Yeah. Yeah. And for many people, that then is and with that, it also opens up something bigger. Is this something I want to explore? Do I want to explore it for myself? Do I want to explore it because I'm caregiving and I'm seeing that the end of life journey is ahead, and I want to have tools for that journey? Or is it that we're in grief and society is not holding that? And how could the narrative be different? And we want to step into it, partly for healing our own hearts, but also because we have a knowing somewhere that this could be different, and we want to be out in the world and sharing that.
yes, it's so beautiful. Yes, and you don't have to be a trained deaf doula to, of course, be of support to your family when the time comes.
Yeah.
So because we're all going to do something. Just going to do it.
Yeah.
So it's so important to have these tools and kind of the education, what can be done differently. So both Birgitta and I have been very inspired for many years now, educating, training, not only to as you spoke, people that have these different needs coming in, but also in a professional container. In hospice, we've been invited in to share some of this work in hospital teams. We've been in nursing. So
because there probably not that many people do this.
Well, and I think more and more we're seeing, which I think is very exciting, we're seeing people wanting to come and be and do our trainings that have a long career in end of life as hospice social workers and nurses, as nurses in hospitals, as chaplains, so many psychologists that are trying to hold space for grief. This affects all of us.
Yeah.
And the more we can weave in the knowing that this is not a medical event, and the more we can hold space, the more we are going to see, I think, really the fabric of our community strengthen. This is what is needed. Because right now you are part of the community until you're not. And that not means you're old or you're dying.
And then you get that away.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a relearning.
Yeah.
This is what our teachings are about, is relearning and re-remembering, so that we can weave that beautiful golden tapestry to roll.
Thank you so much. Are there any last thoughts at all? You've said already so many wonderful things.
Such gratitude in our hearts for allowing us to share this time with you. share this beautiful work. So thank you.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you so much.
Thank you for opening up to the conversation and being in wonder, because I think that's the piece that if we could just shift from looking at it with like this fear-based things, but instead coming to it with questions, coming with wonder. I wonder how it could be different. I wonder what. And sometimes I think people think that we must be very serious, and but there's actually something to it that's very playful, because we have to stay in that space, and we've both learned that to do this work, it's also work about boundaries, and it's also work about like just every day being able to come to joy, come to love, come to a place of like, oh wow, I wonder.
Yeah, incredible. And you've also been present to that dying moment,
Yeah.
which is obviously such an incredible moment.
It's exquisite.
Yeah.
It's a very exquisite moment. And there is such beautiful joy in that.
What a beautiful note to end.
Yes.
I know from me being in your presence, this is always such a gift. And I'm so grateful for you and the work you're doing in this world, and I've been meaning to do this interview for so long. Thank you for making the time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Feels so good.
Thank you.